Any questions from me at this stage? And the day is rainy and cloudy where I am at. So right now, what you guys need to do is let's take a look at what we have this week that you definitely need to do to make sure you stay on track. Most of you are doing all right. You're interacting. A lot of you are attending the class. So like for me, if you're not going to be attending the class and you're not going to submit assessments, that's where you lose the marks for the engagement and participation, and also how you interact with your colleagues or your classmates during the group work. Because if you are engaged, and I mean, you don't have to be 100%, but you have to be in general interactive. You have to be logging on and taking part in the course, and many of you are. So that's wonderful to see. You're submitting your assessment. So this week you have the assignment number three, and towards the end of the class, I'll give you guys hints on how to do that and do it in a manner that will help you get the marks that you want. Okay, and I still have to mark the last one. At some point in the coming weeks, your assignment is going to be making your group. So what you'll do is you'll get together and whether through here or in your other classes at any time, you will need to talk to your classmates about creating a group for the group project, which is going to become really important in the second half, where you'll be spending a lot of time working on it, or you'll be spending some time, maybe not a lot. Okay, so these are a couple of important items for you guys. The other thing to keep in mind is your assessment, your test is in week eight, so it's on the 27th of October, and it is a online test. It's going to be it's going to be open during your class time, but I'll have to think about how I'm going to assess that, how you're going to be able to access that at that time. So that will be Tuesday, October the 27th. Okay. All right. Today, what we're going to focus on is the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. And it was passed in 1999. And that's going to be the focus of what we're going to be looking at today. And it's very similar to the Ontario, sorry, not the Assessment Act, sorry, Environmental Protection Act. So this is what we're going to look at today. The Assessment Act, that's slightly different. So there you go. Okay. So the Environmental Protection Act in Canada, it can be both under federal and provincial jurisdictions. So like I said earlier, the Ontario as well as the Canadian, they're very similar. They're almost parallel. In fact, I would argue that a lot of the aspects of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act are taken from the local or the provincial act. This is under this federal ministry or division. It says Environment Canada and Climate Change, or Environment and Climate Change Canada. It used to be just known as Environment Canada, but under Trudeau, they changed it to Environment and Climate Change Canada. I think that was in 2015 is when that took place. So how do we describe it? Well, it's a federal legislative tool. So the Canadian Environmental Protection Act is at the federal level. It's the national government. While the make sure our layout looks good. And the ministers that are responsible, or the ministries responsible, are the Ministry of the Environment uh, and Climate Change and the Ministry of Health. So what they're trying to do is protect human health and also the environment and our ecosystems. It's basically a comprehensive, that's not even a word. I'm pulling a Donald Trump, making up my own words. A comprehensive approach to environmental management. And what they want us to do is they want us to cover, they want this to cover all aspects of the environment, whether it be research and monitoring, risk assessment, data gathering, risk management, promoting compliance, and enforcing the decisions that an environmental tribunal might make. And it focuses on making sure that Canadians are also a part of the process as well. And um, it encourages jurisdictional cooperation. So here are the principles. Sustainable development is number one. Pollution prevention. What do we mean by sustainable development? Prevention, for example, if you are to do any construction or infrastructure projects, or if you are to invest in a large scale project, you don't want it to degrade the environment. And then when it comes to pollution prevention, an example is you don't want industry to mishandle waste. And you want to basically ensure that whatever substances are in the environment now that are toxic will degrade over time, naturally attenuate. And we want to look at the the earth or our ecosystems as a part of who we are, not separate from us. So when we look at the earth, or when we're looking at the earth, we're thinking about the different systems. You know, you say that the earth is a sphere. So we can divide the earth into the geosphere. So what would that be? That would be the solid earth. That's a solid earth. And then say we have another sphere, it's the atmosphere. It's basically gases that we breathe, our air. We've got the hydrosphere. So wherever there's water, ice, rain. But the most important aspect of, of what we're trying to protect, it's the biosphere. So that's all forms of life, humans included. And when we look at it as being interdependent or as a part of the same system, bring this up again. I might have talked about it earlier, but I'll bring it up again. What you're trying to develop, or what this legislation encouraged consultants, scientists, researchers to develop, was whenever they're working on any aspect of the environment or any aspect of where there could be pollution, is to develop a conceptual site model. A conceptual site model, a CSM. And that the first aspect or element is the source or potential source of contamination. Then, where could that contamination go? Pathway, pathways. Maybe I should say sources, pathways. Lastly, receptors. Who or what are the receptors? That was us. So that would be birds, plants, you and I. So let's now go back to story time. I think I told you guys a story today. So does your existence really depend on the existence of other creatures? Like if we are okay, who cares about the other creatures? Should we? Should we care about just from a technical standpoint? Now, I'm not talking about from a human standpoint. I really feel that yes, we do eat food, and many of us we don't realize how some of the conditions that the animals that we eat are living in. We did, I think a lot of us would turn vegetarian. But everything that we eat was life at one point. So let us see what would happen. Hold on, I'm trying to find it. Okay, here we go. So, Aiden, you bring up an excellent point. Liquid sphere. Yeah, I think if I start making up words, that would be another one. Chainsaw Man. No, no, no. That reminds me too much of the Chainsaw Massacre movie. Okay, all right. So yes, you are correct. Let's see a little bit of a infographic here.
Bees play a crucial role on Earth. Some even claim that if they go extinct, humanity would be next. So with the dramatic decline in bee population, should we be worried? What happens if the bees all die? Simply put, if a plant produces a flower, you can bet that bees help them reproduce. This long-standing working relationship evolved with flowers being bright and fragrant to attract bees, and the bees' fuzzy, velcro-like bodies helping them to efficiently transfer pollen from the male part of the plant to the female part. This seemingly simple mechanism is directly responsible for the production of 70% of fruits, vegetables, seeds, and nuts we consume on a daily basis. 70%, which translates into almost $200 billion in global agriculture revenue. This huge responsibility is accomplished by droves of commercial bees reared by professional beekeepers for the sole purpose of being transported to farms or orchards to pollinate crops. But since 2006, these hardworking, busy bees have been mysteriously disappearing. This colony collapse disorder has seen an average of 1/3 of commercial bees abandoning their hives. In fact, some beekeepers have even reported that 90% of their bees have simply buzzed off. In some
What do you guys think? Where are the bees going?
I've heard that many have been linked to like disease or poor nutrition.
Hmm.
Parasites
I
like mites such as Varroa destructor or Carapace woody.
hmm. Yeah, I do not have the expertise to understand why, but I think that I mean that's good that you're sharing that with me. I did not know that. I've always been under the impression that some of our pesticides have been responsible. Aggressive pesticides. Well, that's what I thought. To a better place. Where did they go to a better place? Sound like a religious person. Okay, continuing here.
colonies, mites, viruses, and parasites have been to blame, but many are now looking at a class of insecticides called neonicotinoids. This neurotoxin is used to kill off crop-eating insects and pests, but also affects the central nervous system of bees when they consume contaminated nectar. And since nectar is brought back to hives, the entire colony can be affected, leading to mass confusion and disorientation. On top of this, other factors such as extremely cold and long winters, a lack of genetic diversity in commercial bees, and less variable nectar in the fields may be at fault. If the trend continues, entire food chains and webs may be at risk. Take almond plants, for example. The hulls of these nuts are used as feed for farm cattle and chickens. Fewer bees means fewer almonds, which could mean declining livestock and ultimately less milk, cheese, eggs, and meat production. Not to mention, almonds are used in cereal, baking, and many other food products. Beef and dairy cows would also be harshly affected by the vanishing alfalfa fields, which are used to harvest hay for cattle. Looking for that morning buzz? Considering bees pollinate Coffea arabica, whose seeds we grind for coffee, you can count that out. Without bees, our diets would consist of mostly corn, wheat, and rice, as they are wind-pollinated plants. Like your clothes, not only is cotton the biggest cash crop in the US, it also makes up about 35% of the world's fiber use. So you can forget about those blue jeans, towels, mattresses, and high-quality paper products. Simply put, we'd be living in a completely different world without bees, not to mention suffering a substantial economic strain from their disappearance. So while we may not necessarily go extinct should the downward trend persist, a world without the buzz of bees would definitely sting. Want a free copy of our new book? Now you can get one from
Okay, so there you go. Uh, I think that a lot of people think we'd have a lot of challenges if we didn't have these. So that shows that it would be in our economic and other interests too. Okay, go ahead, Aiden.
Um, I've heard recently that we've been doing this whole save the bees thing wrong because we focus way too much on European honeybees, which are a species that originate from Europe and are largely domesticated. Whereas some native bee species, like bumblebees, for instance, have been known to pollinate more efficiently and a wider a range of flowers than honeybees do.
Hmm, interesting. I did not know that. I did not know that. So, so I'm gonna take from what Aiden just spoke about and segue. When you do get information like this presenter was presenting, the one thing that they did say that does definitely match up with what Aiden just said is having a lack of diversity within the bee population or the European strain of bee that they might have brought over. I'm definitely not the expert on this topic, so I do definitely take whatever I say and double check it. However, it's very important that when people do give you information about environmental problems or issues, to look into it a little bit deeper, because sometimes there might be more to the story than you're being shown. So thank you for sharing that. Looks like we've got another comment here. Yeah. Okay, good. That's good to know. Makes me feel better. However, we do tend to look at the entire ecosystem as being one. Uh, are you guys seeing my screen now? Ecosystem approach. Thank you. Now, we are looking at using this to have intergovernmental cooperation. We're also looking to use this for polluter pays principle. I'll explain that to you in a minute. And then we've also got, we want to use this in terms of this legislation to make decisions based on science. Now, do I completely agree with that last point? Do I completely agree? Not always does it make sense to only have a science-based approach in the eyes of some in government. For example, can we completely eliminate a virus during the pandemic? Right? Some people wanted it to be where we lost a certain number of people, just like we lose a certain number of people to other diseases every year. And we managed the risk. But if you go by just by the science, then we might still be in lockdown. So I don't complete with just a science-based approach. There has to be other aspects as well. Now, some might argue that the truckers were fascists and this and that, but it's uprisings from the population that does also influence the government, hopefully in a peaceful way, which in the end I guess it did. Uh, but like I was saying, just a science-based approach cannot always be the way you do things. Like for example, I'll give you an example of what I mean. Let's say you have a let's say you have a site and the bank wants you to see if it's contaminated. Let's say it's about the size of Centennial College. Let's say it's Morningside, the Morningside campus, roughly shaped like this. You've got a gas station here, right? You've got tanks somewhere. Let's say the tanks are underground. This is the Morningside. Morningside. Can these tanks leak? Yes. Can these tanks have contamination flowing to our site? Yes. And let's say the bank is doing a financing deal. And let's say they're worried that there's a plume of gasoline contamination underneath the building. Can we investigate? Yes. How will we investigate? We put in boreholes, monitoring wells, check the soil and groundwater. Can we completely eliminate the risk based on these two boreholes? No. But after spending, let's say, 15,000, can we convince the bank that yes, we should be okay? Likely, yes. Because there is a chance. Now, you would say, well, where else is it going to go? So let's say this is Ellesmere, and Ellesmere has utility lines underneath. You know, this is where the people are standing. Yeah, I agree with you, Stefan. And that's why you'll notice in countries like let's for say, for example, Pakistan, Russia, they're more risk tolerant. And then you look at how China wanted to handle it when they wanted it down to zero COVID, which was completely impossible. Okay. Anyway, so let's say you've got utility lines, right? Running underneath. Sometimes what happens is the contamination gets into those utility lines and it flows along those, and then it enters the site at some point. That has happened. So you cannot completely eliminate the risk, but you want to mitigate it. Because then, if you're trying to drill all along the utility corridor, are you going to be able to? Are you going to be able to say 100%? Maybe closer to 100%, but how much money are you going to spend? Recently, someone was Texas, but the government advised citizens not to use water excessively to prevent flooding, and people wanted to waste more water on despite. Yeah, a lot of people react badly to government legislation. Like, for example, when they were trying to, so the Bhopal gas disaster that you're referring to is not what I'm referring to. That was air. That was air. This is subsurface utilities. So what happens is that when you have leaks in a tank, underground tank, it might get into the utility lines because the native material might be lower porosity, um, less permeable, especially for liquid contamination. So what would happen is that it likes to flow through the utility corridor. We have the pipes surrounded by gravel or fill material, and it's a lot more porous and it's conducive for them. And so you don't 100% eliminate the risk, but you mitigate it. And that's what you have to do. Because if you just go by science, then you'll be spending money and it's economically not viable. But that is what that is what this act is supposed to help us with as well. Science-based decision making. But yes, but keep in mind you want to weigh your options as well. You have to look at the social like socioeconomic issues. So here is what you could call the CEPA, Canadian Environmental Protection Act management cycle, where you are basically trying to manage the risk. You also want compliance for the environmental regulations. You might also have to assess the risk by doing studies like a site assessment and then determining the risk. Research and monitoring to better enhance our abilities in the environmental field. So we do have a few items to consider when we are talking about the Environmental Assessment Act. Keep saying Assessment Act, environmental, the Environmental Protection Act. It is how a substance could affect living organisms. And then if it affects the living organisms, how does it break down? So let me give you guys another story. I'll share with you guys another story that will help you. It's a concept that you might be already familiar with. And so what has happened in the past is we have had we have polluted the Great Lakes. We have polluted the sediment. And then from that sediment, how would it end up affecting humans? Through stepwise bio accumulation and biomagnification. So when food items lower on the chain are consuming materials that have mercury that we've dumped into the Great Lakes, at some point it can reach us up the food chain through bioaccumulation and biomagnification. And it hits us hard. Yes, exactly, Aiden. Aiden is correct. So let's see very quick about mercury and biopollution.
And if some of the rants coming out of the popular press are correct, terribly dangerous to boot. The possible problem? Mercury. Ah, cool stuff, mercury. I remember my grandparents had a big jar of it, and I would pour it out and play with it for hours. Unfortunately, now we know that it is easily absorbed into the body, even by the skin, and that can cause serious problems, which is why we couldn't actually get hold of any. So, how is it that mercury gets into our fish? Well, I'll tell you. Mercury naturally occurs in many rocks, like coal. Burn the coal at, say, a power plant, and the mercury goes skyward from the plant smokestacks. Precipitation carries it back to the ground, where streams and rivers then move it into the sea. There, it is set upon by bacteria, which turn it into the far more dangerous methyl mercury. Microscopic amounts end up in small fish, which are consumed by medium fish, which are then consumed by large predators, including big tuna, which, due to their long lifespans, tend to store up more mercury in their bodies than other fish. When we eat them, some small portion of the mercury becomes ours for a long time.
There you go. That was nicely done. Okay.
Hi everybody, it's Ms. B. Hope you're having a great day and that you're ready for another class in science. So for the past couple of days, we've been talking about different nutrients or elements like carbon and oxygen and how they're important to sustaining life on this planet. We have to have the
if you are not
elements like carbon
familiar
and
with it,
oxygen
I'm
so
gonna
that we can
post it.
breathe and we can cycle energy
Learn
through our system.
bioaccumulation.
It's really important that we know how that element is properly cycled in our ecosystem and how to regulate that. Now, one thing we didn't talk about is the bad nutrients. There's also different elements that are not good for our bodies, and they also get cycled through our system.
Put it in week 4.
Now, the two fancy words that we are going to be learning today in relation to this are bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Now, they do sound very similar, however, there are some distinct differences between the two. So as we go through the notes, make sure you're listening in for bioaccumulation and biomagnification so that you can tell the difference. Now, in order to talk about these, we're kind of going to go back to basics for a minute. We now know that energy and nutrients can move through a food chain or a food web from producers to consumers, meaning that my producer, like my tree down here.
We don't have time for that right now, but if you guys want to watch it, go ahead. Oh, you don't see it, the video? Well, Jeffrey, I've posted the link for you guys because we're gonna just keep going. I've posted it in week 4 for your own sake to make sure you understand the concept of bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Okay. Let's go back to the slides. We're making good progress, which is good. Okay. Now we do after the break we'll spend some time watching it, but one of the main aspects of the CEPA is how to handle toxic materials and substances that pose a risk to the environment and human health. And so they created a registry under the CEPA, and it gives Canadians the ability to consult on some of the decisions that need to be made regarding the materials. So the goal of the registry is to make it easier to access current information related to the act, such as regulations, gazette notices, basically that's a public notification. Permits, who has a permit to do what? What are the guidelines? Codes of practice. What are the agreements? Like, for example, do we have an agreement with the US about the Great Lakes? Yes, we do. Any plans that are environmentally related or been impacted? What are our environmental policies? Substances, how the substances are regulated, and also if we have any enforcement or compliance issues. So the structure of the Act is that it's got 356 sections and 20 schedules, and then you've got 12 broad parts. And they are basically the administration aspect, what is part public participation, where, like, for example, they issue a gazette or they encourage you to talk to the First Nations community near where your project is about to happen. How to gather information. How to prevent pollution is part 4. Toxic substances control is under part 5. Biotechnology is under part 6. Now, how to manage waste, which is very much about controlling pollution, is part 7. Part 8 is emergencies, environmental matters referring to related to emergencies. Like, for example, if you have a train derailment, or an example of an environmental emergency caused by a disaster would be your leak at the plant in Japan when they had the earthquake. I think it was in 2011, March. 9/11 just passed, and so there was an air quality issue for the first responders. So the people who passed away later on, not on the day of the attacks, was because of the impacts to their lungs. Part 9 relates to the First Nations. Part 10, enforcement. At 11 is miscellaneous. And we'll try to go through some of these. Like the amendments are in part 12. So this slide basically is intended to, reaffirm the fact that this gives government, the courts, municipalities the ability to enforce environmental regulations. And it was under this that, even though it came before the EPA, the Ontario Environment Protection Act came. Now, this is a little more streamlined, in my opinion. So the main purpose of the Ontario Environmental Protection Act is to protect, conserve the natural environment around us. It's air, water, land. It actually states, I believe, that we do not want to cause adverse effects that would impair the enjoyment of or cause safety issues to anybody, or create any emissions or discharges that are not approved under this legislation. So there's a case that I want to bring up here that I think you'll enjoy. Find it. Let's go through it. I believe it is under this act that they were prosecuted. Let's go through this document. So essentially what happened is that a mine owner, drilling contractor, and construction company were fined a total of $177,500 for Environmental Protection Act violations. And it was an up in Sault Ste. Marie, and they were charged with basically a flying rock that caused an adverse effect. What they were doing is, from what I understand, is they were working at a gold mine site in this district of Alabama. And let me increase that font for you guys. So I believe that they were doing some construction and excavation, and a blasting subcontractor provided blasting services. So they basically had the blast set up so that it would, they understood it would only fly a certain distance. However, the rock, the blast rock, flew beyond that, and it actually fell onto somebody's house. And that's why they were convicted. Why? Because they caused somebody safety to be impacted and caused an adverse effect in the air, which actually landed on that person's house. So that was an interesting case to me. I think it was the size of a car, if I remember. Yeah. So nobody was hurt, but they did cause significant damage to this person's home. So they caused an adverse effect. And it looks like now another interesting case when it comes to protecting the environment was the shark fins. soup, shark fins, soup ban Ontario. So Ontario tried to ban. So what they tried to do is they tried to ban shark fins. Why? Under the Environmental Protection. Why saying that? So what happened is that the Ontario Superior Court judge said that it's not valid. Why? Because certain Chinese business community members challenged the ban. And they said that you're banning an ethnic item, whereas even though even though there was a push to have it banned under an environmental legislation, it actually got pushed back at a later date. So this is back in 2012. Yeah, so no, but yeah, Aiden, but a lot of people apparently drink it, or eat it, or I don't know, do you drink soup? I guess you drink soup. Hmm, interesting. Well, that's not just shark fins. So some communities think that, um, yes, that's basically what it was. The shark fishing, they wanted to block it to protect the shark population. But that was part of it. Interesting. Now, if you want to look at interesting environmental cases, so um, under this act, I think it was in, let's see. Okay, so I don't have it here, so I'm just not going to try to look it up. But I'll give you guys another interesting case, a few interesting cases that can. We do have people who consider North America to be within the threads of a cultural war. So recently, the sad news came that right-wing conservative public speaker Charlie Kirk was killed. So and this has sparked a lot of conversation about these cultures, discussions going back and forth. And we should protect people who have different points of view. But I want to give you guys an example of where this has been going on for some decades now. So if you go to a certain place where certain places you used to hear church bells. So a bunch of people who are agnostic and atheists sued because not only were church bells, but then there was I think this is Montreal, I might be wrong. And then there was the Azan, so the call to prayer was going to be, because they said, well, if they can get church bells, we should get the Azan. Right? So they were sued by non-religious non-religious folks under the Environmental Protection Act, saying that this is air pollution. I think they won. So that's why in a lot of places you don't hear church bells like you used to. And except during the pandemic, you don't hear the azan in many jurisdictions. In the pandemic, they did allow it, when mosques were shut down. And I think they allowed church bells as well in some jurisdictions. Yeah, a lot of atheists, they said it's air pollution, noise pollution. No, you're right. Noise pollution. So then, based on this, we find this interesting. So a bunch of religious people got together. I think it was Jewish, Christian, Muslim groups, and they sued some of the nightclubs. Could have been nightclubs, or it could have been, I don't know, some kind of clubs. It could have been adult entertainment, and saying that's also causing noise pollution. So interestingly, Jeffrey bring up a great point for the construction. So It is, so there's certain laws that are overseen by municipalities that actually stem from this environmental protection. And you bring up a great point. You can say it's a good comeback, Aiden. Um, Somebody was talking to me about this recently. I think I was in Dubai, I think at the time. You can find a bar or a club close to a mosque. It was like, okay, you can go to one place or you can go to the other. I guess some people go to the bar and go to the mosque afterwards or church afterwards. Who knows? But the options are given for people to open it. But some people don't want to do the option. They want to have a more theocratic society. Okay. All right. What was I getting at? So under the CEPA, oh, it's not really working. Hmm. So under the CEPA, noise pollution. So that's why if you ever go to any site, construction site, they are not allowed to make any noise before 7 a.m. And that does come from noise pollution and adverse effects in the air and human beings' enjoyment of the environment. So it's 7 a.m. and I think you have to stop by 7 p.m. This is where they get into stormwater. They've derived stormwater, waste. Recently, they've even got now soil, excess soil. So a lot of really good has come from the EPA. Yes, we can say maybe we shouldn't have gone after the shark fin. I don't know. I'm not really the person to ask on that, but that is what happened. Or the pesticide ban. Was it overreach? Some argue it was the pesticide ban under McGinty. Now under Ford, the new legislation, excess soil, it's under the Ontario Environmental Protection Act, but it came recently. Why? Because they want to have soil as a resource and not waste, not go to landfills. It's reason. Remember, right from the start, what did I say? What are we trying to protect? The atmosphere, geosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere. Anything that comes under that, the government is using this legislation to protect. Okay, so yep, there you go. So the Ontario Environmental Protection Act, it has 197 sections. And the first one or two sections are more about interpretation, like what does each term mean? And then you've got secondary discharge. You've got different provisions, like the environmental compliance approvals, registration of your waste, motor vehicles, water, waste management, uh, ozone depleting substances, abandoned motor vehicles, littering, spills, what is a control or a stop order, financial assurance, appeals to the tribunal, work done by the Ministry of Provincial Officers, the Environmental Council. So we'll try to go through some of the basic aspects, or a few of these aspects. But we'll do that after a short break, okay? Let's take a short break right now. So let's go ahead and meet in about 5 minutes or so. Okay, guys. Okay, we were talking about some cases. Take a look. Hopefully you guys are all back. Some of the cases I was mentioning. This is where a bid by a strip club in Montreal to continue blasting outside the sounds from the inside, upholding. So this company said that it was a freedom of expression, but in a 6-1 ruling, the Supreme Court ruled limits to the right justifiable to guarantee the quality of life. Why? Because the ruling supports the noise bylaw, because it's to control noises that interfere with the peaceful enjoyment of the urban environment. So that was one case. There's another one. This is actually in the US, that a group of nuns in a tiny Illinois town is suing a $3 million strip club that opened in September in their backyard, behind their backyard garden, for being unlawfully close to a place of worship. I don't think that this article has the outcome. This says that they were sued. I don't remember following what happened in this case, but there you go. So, interesting. So, okay, let's take a look at. I think I've got a clip for you guys. The Canadian Environmental Act and
Grammarly now uses AI to help you write, not just revise. Type a prompt and generate a persuasive, mistake-free draft in seconds. Personalized to your... The Canada Environmental...
The Canada Environmental Protection Act, CEPA, 1999, regulates toxic substances under the Prohibition of Certain Toxic Substances regulations. These regulations prohibit the manufacture, use, sale, offer for sale, or import of certain toxic substances. Accordingly, CEPA may modify the list of substances when required. CEPA is one of the most significant laws in Canada contributing to sustainable development. Critical sections of the Act deal with respecting pollution prevention and protecting the environment and human health. Introduction to the Prohibition of Certain Toxic Substances regulations. In essence, the Prohibition of Certain Toxic Substances regulations, 2012, prevents the manufacture, use, sale, or import of a list of toxic substances and the products containing them. Subject to these regulations, CEPA publishes the list of substances on its registry website. An important note is that CEPA may amend these regulations periodically by adding new substances or adapting them to industry developments. These restrictions are exclusively related to PFOA, PFOS, LCPFCAs, PBDEs, and HBCD. Amendment to the Prohibition of Certain Toxic Substances regulations under the Canada Environmental Protection Act. On December 20, 2018, CEPA published a consultation document intending to amend the Prohibition of Certain Toxic Substances regulations. In particular, the purpose of this amendment is to phase out the use of the following CEPA toxic substances: perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA, and
so PFAS and PFOAs are going to be amongst the biggest issues that you will see we're dealing with as a society.
its salts or precursors, perfluorooctane sulfonate, PFOS, and its salts or precursors, long-chain perfluorocarboxylic acids, LCPFCAs, and their salts or precursors, polybrominated diphenyl ethers, PBDs, which is also a category in RoHS regulations, hexabromocyclododecane, HBCD. Furthermore, this amendment bans the manufacture, use, sale, offer for sale, and import of 2 additional toxic substances and products containing them: decabromodiphenyl ethane, DBDPE, and dichlorane plus, DP. These 7 substances are mostly persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic, PBT, in the environment and can move long distances. Consequently, They threaten some Canadian ecosystems, including the endangered southern resident killer whale and the St. Lawrence estuary beluga. Therefore, maintaining restrictions on these substances through regulations is critical for decreasing their concentration to the lowest possible levels in the Canadian environment. Why does CEPA regulate PFAS with the prohibition of certain toxic substances regulations? PFASs are a group of human-made chemicals. They are generally resistant to oil, water, and heat. Various consumer, industrial, and commercial products contain PFAS, including insulating cables in different electrical and electronic products, solar panels, cleaning products, firefighting foams, textiles, e.g., furniture, carpets, clothes, food packaging, food processing equipment, cookware, cosmetics, etc. Three well-known PFASs are PFOA, which is part of the perfluorocarboxylic acids, PFCs, family, PFAS and LC-PFCAs. Here are some of the specific harmful effects of PFASs on human health. Rising cholesterol levels, changing enzymes in the liver, increasing risk of kidney or testicular cancer, raising blood pressure, especially in pregnant women, which leads to hypertension and preeclampsia disease, reducing vaccine efficiency in children, rising risk of thyroid disease. Therefore, the Government of Canada has prohibited these dangerous substances through various regulations, including the previously mentioned Prohibition of Certain Toxic Substances Regulations, 2012. PBDEs are brominated flame retardants. There are more than 200 substances in the family of PBDEs such as tetra-BDE, penta-BDE, hexabide, hepta-BDE, octad, nonabda, and decabda. Various products contain PBDEs, including electrical and electronics, furniture, building materials, automobiles and airplanes, plastics, and textiles. If a certain amount of PBDEs enter the environment, they can cause immediate or long-term adverse impacts. These chemicals can result in thyroid and liver problems not only in animals but also in humans. As a result, many countries internationally have regulated PBDEs based on their concentrations and applications in different products. HBCD is another brominated flame retardant. In Canada, the application of this substance is limited to the automotive sector. However, some products made from recycled plastics may contain small amounts of HBCD. HBCD is dangerous to the environment due to its toxicity, persistence, and bioaccumulation characteristics. Consequently, this chemical has been on the Substance of Very High Concern (SVHC) list under the European REACH regulation since October 28, 2008. DBDPE is an organic flame retardant substance. In Canada, many applications use DBDPE as an additive to slow the combustion and spread of fire, such as plastic, primarily thin plastics, and rubber materials, electrical and electronic products, and adhesives and sealants. Indeed, the environmental degradation of DBDPE is slow and could produce persistent and bioaccumulative substances which are specifically very toxic to aquatic organisms. In addition, several studies have demonstrated the harmful effects of DBDPE on the liver, thyroid, reproduction, and neurons of animals. DP is an organic substance used as an additive flame retardant to slow the start or spread of fire. Many applications use this substance, such as electrical and electronics products, e.g., wire and cable coating, appliances, automotive, plastics, e.g., nylon, polyolefin heat shrink, EPDM, etc.
You guys get the gist. So coming to the end of this clip, I've also kept this link for you guys as well.
DP may cause adverse effects on the environment due to its persistence and bioaccumulation characteristics. Hence, in January 2018, European Chemical Agency, ECHA, recognized DP as a substance of very high concern, SVHC, under the REACH regulation. Other Canadian regulations apply to products, such as the Canadian Energy Efficiency Regulations 2016, SOR 2016-311. Are these regulations and their amendments affecting the compliance of your products and services? Reach out to the EnviroPass team to get help and consultation for your environmental obligations.
Excellent. Good stuff. Okay, continuing. So the ECA is what I'm going to cover now. Approvals are basically used to regulate high-risk industries and activities. And they were introduced in 2011, and they replaced C of A's, certificates of approval. So environmental compliance approvals are now what you have to get under different sections of the Act. Like, for example, the Ontario Water Resources Act. And what it is, it's if you were to release or emit any pollutants into the air, land, or sea, or if you were to store, transport, or dispose of waste, you need to have permission from the Ministry of the Environment. What is that permission? That is an ECA. This is actually, if you guys are working, let's say, in the ministry, or if you guys end up working for a consulting firm, you might end up dealing with what advanced environmental compliance rules. Or ECAs. Uh-oh. It's like or ECAs. Examples of where you need an ECA. If you are a waste transportation company. That would require an ECA. Or if you, let's say you paint, you spray paint things and you emit the environment. Not sure why. Use the angle here. Where else would you have an ECA? Water treatment. Have a water treatment. Or let's say you're a remediation company. At some point, we're going to talk about ECAs at least a few more times. Other examples, if you carry or deal with asbestos waste, stored at a facility. If you have a landfill, if you provide drinking water, so I'll give you guys an example of what happened when I worked on an ECA. So what the client wanted to do is, it's up in Northern Ontario. They basically have domestic waste. Basically, instead of sending water from the toilets to a water treatment plant like we would here in this community, they didn't have that. So they stored it in a tank and then it's pumped out. And then it's taken to a series of waste lagoons. So just this is the cross-sectional view. What they would do is they would pour the wastewater from toilets into these lagoons. What happens is over time, it seeps into the subsurface and the soil acts like a natural filter. Depending on where the water level is, by the time that liquid reaches the groundwater, ground, it's not different, maybe green, the groundwater, hopefully it is no longer going to be a problem. But in order for them to operate this, what is known as a liquid domestic waste site, they needed to first do a bunch of studies. What did those studies entail? To get the ECA, soil study, groundwater study, and surface water study. And then you had to assess, in this, you had to assess the porosity, permeability. Here you'd have to assess hydraulic flow. Here you had to see how far the near surface water body was and what the water quality is. And you had to put all of this information together and let's see if the camera will start working again. You have to pull all of this together in a design and operations report. No, it's not working today. I'm not sure why. Let's use the normal camera. Put it together in a design and operations report. And you had to convince the ministry that there will be no significant impact or impairment caused by little fund proposing. See if I can find that for you guys. I'm not being able to find it that I'm looking for. There you go. Actually, it was right before the pandemic that we submitted this. It's the design report where we tell them what the soil conditions are like, the topography, the geology, any previous reports that we have, the geology at the site, the subsurface conditions, groundwater conditions. Darcy's law. We looked at the groundwater quality, the permeability, the grain size, content. We did some calculations about the percolation rates. We look closely at the geological setting. So this is all under the Environmental Protection Act to get this ECA. And then we looked at the trench design, the length. We call them lagoons, but they're actually trenches. And we had to submit all of this, asking them to give our client the approval. Well, I don't see the site photos or anything, but that's basically the thing. Now I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to find the actual ECA. Show you what an actual ECA looks like. So this is for a landfill. That was our client years ago. And it is also an ECA. So basically it's amended. So it's the environmental compliance approval. The reason for the amendment was that this city they needed to increase their capacity of their landfill. Initially, they'll have all of the different definitions and then the terms and conditions that they can operate these landfills. Basically, you'll see the same terminology that we've been discussing today, like, for example, avoiding adverse effects, inspections by the ministry, records retention, who's the registered owner of the landfill, who will operate the site, how will they protect the area to guide your traffic litter, no burning of waste. And emergencies. So this is actually a pretty lengthy one. They also have to do some water quality monitoring as a part of their environmental management system. And they've got a limit. Now, let's say I want to show you guys another instance that'll be helpful to you guys. Actually, I'll give you guys two more examples of ECAs. So in this first example, I'm going to show you, we have a site where the client said that they're going to store fuel. So the fuel tanks, I think that's 6,000 gallons. So in order to get this ECA, we had to come up with a bunch of things that they had to do. Like, number one, they had to put concrete and then clay liner under impermeable concrete. Next, they had to build berms or barriers so that if everything leaks in all of these two tanks at the same time, they have 110% of that volume capacity. So let's say XYZ, like this is tank XYZ. The total volume is, let's say it's 20,000 gallons. So what is 110% of that? So everything leaked, this area can hold 22,000 gallons. And they've got clay, they've got impermeable, and then they've got monitoring wells in the area to make sure that if there's a leak that's undetected, that it's not leaving, that the oil is not leaving the site. So we had to go through a rigorous process with the ministry to get this approved. And you gotta say what the proposed facility is, what the topography is like, what are the conditions, what are they going to be doing, what type of waste or oil, fuel, waste fuel that they're going to be handling, the volume. And you got to give them all this information and fill out a bunch of forms in a lot of detail. We're supposed to have that. Here's the site. We also did a soil report as well for them, or somebody did. I didn't do a soil report. And I do remember trying to draw some drawings for them where they've got this. They at this stage they had not built the tanks, but this is where they were proposing to put the above ground storage tanks. You want to do a flow diagram, show there you go. You got your concrete pad, concrete barrier, your tanks stored site. Now, the reason why I'm trying to ask you guys to consider, I'll think about this a little bit more closely, is because a lot of you will, at some point, if you're in the industry, you will be looking at ECAs or dealing with ECAs, or you'll have to be in compliance with an ECA. And so it's important for you to remember that. Okay, any questions? Thanks, Jeffrey. Now let's take a look at, okay, let's see. You also need to, if you're going to do in situ remediation where you pump chemicals into the ground, you need an ECA for that as well. So we got an ECA for that, and it was very interesting. You have to go through the entire set of details about how you're going to pump chemicals into the ground that are going to treat the water. So in this case, it was I think it was a chemical oxidation and reduction. We had to list the different types of chemicals that we put into the ground and how we're going to put them into the ground and before they would give us any approval. So you can inject it, you can use a drilling rig to pump it into the ground. You can put a trench into the ground and let it seep in where the trench acts as a reservoir. But you need to get approval from the ministry. And I just go around pumping chemicals into the ground. And they wanted a lot of background information. I think this application that I sent had about almost 450 pages with all of this information, and they went through it with a fine tooth comb. Okay. Jeffrey, so when you say how long does it take for something like that to make, could you clarify the question? Like, is it the report or is it to get the actual ECA? Oh, about a week to 2 weeks. Um, that would be once you have all of the documentation in-house. And so that's why uh, we charge about 12 to 15,000 up to 20,000. Companies charge that much to get a ECA. Okay, so we're coming to the near to the end of the lecture. We've got a few more slides. So the environmental approval, it basically sets out legally enforceable aspects and rules for the operation, which are meant to protect the environment, the soil, the groundwater, the air, Now, if the application, or when you do submit the application, and it can take a year or so to get the approval. Why? Because of the amount of scrutiny that it undergoes. They also do ask for the best available technology to be applied, and that the industry always looks to reduce the level of contaminants being discharged. Certain places like wastewater discharge facilities are monitored closely, and they might have to submit additional paperwork every year. And in some situations, there are exemptions. Like, for example, if something is very routine, instead of filing an ECA, you can file for an EASER, an environmental activity site registry that you can simply put your information in. So you don't have to spend the time and money to get an ECA. Here are some of the lists of the different regulations that are under the Environmental Protection Act. And here's where I want to mention that I believe the next topic is the Safe Drinking Water that we're going to study next weekend, the Ontario Water Resources Act. Now, let's go back and revisit. We are at coming this weekend, we'll be at the end of week number 4. So let's take a look at where we're at. And of course, wow, it's going to be a headache. I'll have to twist your head to read that. So we've already gone through the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Environmental Protection Act. So next is going to be the Safe Drinking Water Act. That is the next item that we're going to work on. Now, today though, I'm not going to leave you just like that. I would like to ask you to do 2 things. One, go back and review everything that's been covered so far, because if you leave it to the end, you might have an issue. You might have an issue in terms of making sure that you understand everything for the test. So spend some time reviewing everything every week. The slides has information that should help you. Number 1. Number 2, in the remaining time, work on. So like we're just under 2 hours or an hour, and we're just over an hour and a half. So we have over an hour left for your class time this week. An hour and 15 minutes. Use that time to complete 2 things. 1, online assignment number. Number 2. How are you going to do that? Let's take a look. Look up and explain the following terms from the CEPA. Biological diversity, ecosystem, and the environment. So no more than about 200, 300 words. Okay, guys, don't go crazy. But what you're going to do now is this will give you a chance to become familiar with, or slightly familiar with, the Environmental Assessment Act. Not Assessment Act. Keep doing it again. Protection Act. Because I work more with the Assessment Act. So you're going to spend some time doing this. Secondly, I have another task for you this week. Start talking to people about making a group. because one of the tasks in the coming week is going to be you'll create a group for the group project. Now, I'm not going to officially announce the group project yet. Parent project. I might have mentioned it before. This is sort of what it's going to look like. Thinking that if you can get 4 people, 3 people is okay. 2 is all right as well. So it's 25% of the course. 5% is the presentation online. 5% is the knowledge. 5% is questions and answers. So I'll be asking you guys questions about it. So, to verify that you know what you're talking about. Number 10, 10% is the written portion. And so at some point in the coming weeks, I will be asking you to create a group. And I'll be posting this out for you guys. And that will be important. And then you have to select a topic. Maybe you want to select one of the topics we've already talked about. The love canal, nuns suing the strip club, the Muslims wanting to call the azan, and the atheist saying, no, we don't want to hear Arabic singing in the air. Who knows how Hamtramck, Michigan? I'm not sure. Or you can look at the flying rock incident, the shark fin case. Yeah, I can give you guys examples. But once you have the group, we can start working on it. Okay. All right. So it looks like that's all I have for you from a lecture point of view. I'm going to stop the recording, but you guys can stick around and ask me questions. I'll stop the recording now, and I'll post this recording soon. You guys are going to make me a popular YouTuber.